We're back, and we're having what I consider to be one of the high points of our week at Securing America, and that is our visit each week with Sam Faddis, a longtime, well, important national security practitioner in our country, both as a uniformed officer in the United States Army and subsequently as a member of the clandestine service of the Central Intelligence Agency. In some ways, perhaps his most important service to our country, however, is going on at the moment, where he is bringing great clarity through the pages of andmagazine.com at Substack to most of the really challenging issues of our time. And Sam, I want to pivot from the conversation we've just had about the prospects of perhaps imminent Chinese use of force against us, possibly including biological warfare, to talk with you about what I think we agree was an example of them doing it about 2 years ago in the form of the so called COVID pandemic. Talk a little bit about that as a dress rehearsal for a more dangerous attack, perhaps, if not actually just that. And how the World Health Organization comported itself in the course of all of that.
Well, look, I don't think there can be any question in a reasonable, rational mind that COVID came out of a lab in Wuhan and it was the product of gain of function research. So, whether the Chinese deliberately released that or they're just sloppy, which we know is true, I still am undecided on that point. But it is a manufactured, an engineered disease that came out of a Chinese lab. And whether they intended it or not, what they got out of it is a clear blueprint for how to execute such an attack. And and they saw very vividly that we were completely inept in responding to it. And basically everything we did made the problem worse. So one way or the other, they got a template for how to do this. The WHO aided and abetted this. And again, it's one of these things like when you see a silhouette of a Nimitz class aircraft carrier and they're firing missiles at it, you ought to be able to figure out they're getting ready to sink our aircraft carriers. When you see a guy who's a Maoist terrorist, Tedros, who's the head of the who is completely beholden to Xi Jinping running that organization, it ought to not be a real shock that everything they do furthers the interest of communist China. And they will continue to do that.
Yeah. Sam, let me go back to something you alluded to there. You were talking about the WHO not doing anything particularly useful, that we made a lot of mistakes, many of them at the direction of Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization. Isn't it correct that basically what we did that proved to be so wrong and arguably contributed to the loss of, uh, well, a very substantial portion of 1 million people who have now perished in this country to the CCP virus, is because we followed the China model for how to deal with all of this, and the mask mandates, the lockdowns, the quarantines, the use of inadequately tested vaccines, the mandating of such use, and then the passports to assure that those vaccinations took place. I mean, that's all right out of what China was dictating through Tedros, was it not? And do you agree that that contributed to the problems that you've just described?
That at the heart of the problem, and you are obviously 100% correct, as Dr. Hatfill, our friend, has said many times, we had an existing pandemic response plan. We were in the process of beginning to implement it. It was shoved completely off the table, and we went to a whole series of measures, lockdowns and so forth, that were CCP methodology, had never been part of our pandemic plan. We scrapped our plan and followed Beijing's directions on how to respond to this. That's precisely what we did.
And to the extent that we did, we have, in numerous ways, not only contributed to problems in terms of public health, and I would argue the needless loss of an awful lot of lives,
Mhm.
but we've also seen, Sam, a terrible diminution of our freedoms and our the sort of fabric of our constitutional republic. And as this program, as you know, is dedicated to protecting the country we love and the Constitution, we both swore an oath of office at various points in our careers to
Right.
protect and defend it. Um, what are your thoughts about the status of that constitutional republic we love at this moment, under the not so tender mercies of the Biden administration, to say nothing of these other enemies, foreign and domestic?
Well, there is absolutely no question that the folks who really are enemies of the Republic have hit on the fact that all you have to do is utter the words public health emergency, and somehow magically the entire Bill of Rights ceases to exist. And, and they don't want to give up that power. And I have noted and written about recently the fact that actually, if you watch Joe Biden and his administration, what you see is not only that on display, but isn't it amazing how increasingly there is no reference to any other branch of government? Biden talks to the people. He never introduces a bill into Congress. He never asks for congressional support or American support. He issues edicts. Somehow or another, we're really rapidly transitioning into what amounts to almost a monarchy or some sort of autocracy in which the president now legislates. He doesn't administer and he doesn't act according to laws that Congress passes. He just gets on camera and informs us that this is now what we are doing with no congressional action. And terrifyingly enough, Congress just sort of sits there and watches as he
Yeah.
does this.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Sam. We're on the eve of an election. I hope, despite uh, concerns that we've just been sharing about the possibility we might find ourselves at war, and as we talked about in the webinar yesterday, that may well be used as a pretext for interfering with, or at least postponing, an election we all hope will uh, bring about a course correction for our nation. But you'd think, under these circumstances, members of Congress, at least Republican members of Congress, or challengers to the Democrats, would be coming forth and making the case to the American people that you need that course correction, you need us to bring it about, or we really do risk the loss of what's left of our constitutional republic.
Yeah, you would think so, but I think you search in vain most of the time to find anyone who is doing anything meaningful to combat any of this, uh, any of Biden's initiative. I mean, on energy, the man is destroying the entire economy, livelihoods, deliberately, admittedly, deliberately crushing our entire energy infrastructure
Mm.
based on whatever motivations. And nobody is doing anything to stop. You got truck drivers who can't work anymore. It takes $2,000 to fill up a semi now every time you go to the pump,
If you can find the diesel,
if you
yeah,
can find the diesel,
yeah.
and nobody's doing anything.
And of course, the ripple effect through the economy is, it's not just confined to the energy sector that's being impacted, as you
No.
pointed out in a terrific piece at End Magazine on your Substack docket. This is going to be affecting food and every other aspect of our lives, including inflation. Sam Faddis, we have to leave it at that. A grim note to say goodbye, but thank you for your leadership on all of these fronts, my friend, and most especially for the clarity that you bring to these challenges and why we must stand up against them. And you're an inspiration to us. Thank you for joining us each week. Well, look, stay tuned for more. We'll talk with an aide to a great British legislator. His name is Peter McKidd. Right after this.